What can ancient hermits teach us about Christian nationalism? We're talking about the Desert Elders with Lisa Colón DeLay on Compass. Welcome back to Compass, Finding Spirituality in the Everyday. My name is Ryan Dunn. In this episode, I spoke with Lisa Colón DeLay. We had an exploration of the fascinating and often overlooked world of the Desert Elders. And this is a movement within early Christianity, which is marked by radical simplicity, renunciation, and spiritual depth. You'll hear who these desert mothers and fathers were, what motivated thousands to leave behind wealth, power, and societal expectations to seek wisdom in the deserts, and why their stories are deeply relevant today. You can find out more about forgotten female leaders, rigorous ascetic practices, and the ways in which the Desert Elders' teachings still shape spiritual practices around the world now. Lisa Colón DeLay is a repeat guest here on Compass. We've previously talked to her about her book, The Wild Land Within, which is about cultivating wholeness and healing through spiritual practices. She's now released The Way of the Desert Elders, which we're going to learn all about in this episode. Lisa is a coach in spiritual formation and creates lots of related products and resources. And since 2015, she's produced the Spark My Muse podcast featuring luminaries, authors, and her own work. If conversations like this are meaningful for you, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe buttons wherever it is that you're listening to this podcast. We appreciate it. Now, let's get to talking about ancient aesthetics with Lisa Colón DeLay. Lisa, welcome back to the Compass podcast. It's so nice to see you again and great to be able to talk about something that I've been curious about, but haven't been able to find a ton of information about. So I want to set the table for our listener a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about who the Desert Elders were?
Absolutely. And first, I'll just say thank you so much, Ryan, for your
You bet.
interest. And it's nice to be with you again. Um, the Desert Elders it's a whole movement of Christianity I knew extremely little about. A lot of forgotten voices in
Mm.
our ancestry, in our Christian ancestry, and a lot of forgotten female leaders as well.
Oh,
And it was kind of like a whole side quest, I guess you could say. It was an entire new world that sort of opened up to me. And when I was writing my first book and I was learning about Evagrius, this desert hermit, I thought, well, he's not actually, he's a hermit, but there's a whole community supporting him. And then it's
mm.
not just the community. There's all these essentially cities in the desert that sprung up. And I thought, what, up to 500,000 people leave their villages and cities for the desert. We should know about that in Christian history.
Ah,
Why did it happen? And what can we learn from them? And so it's been a really intriguing ride.
yeah. You noted in the beginning of the book that some of the situations or societal conditions that the elders were reacting to are present in our own day. What might be some of those aspects that we would identify with?
Yeah, it's the first instance of Christian nationalism, which
Mm,
it's really interesting. So Christianity goes from being this religion, or really a walk of faith that follows Jesus. It's, people of the way of Jesus.
mhm.
And the Roman Empire does everything they can to kill off this group and just slaughter after slaughter, crucifixion after crucifixion. There's 300 years of all kinds of martyrdom
Mm.
and all kinds of persecution. And then they decided, well, if we can't beat them, let's just join them.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
co-opt this and
Co-op, yep,
take it
there it
for
is. Yeah.
ourselves and assume power. And a huge shift happened. And we still live under these kinds of influences today, and how we view sin and punishment and justice. This all comes from empire Christianity, not the way of Jesus, not the Sermon on the Mount.
Mm.
So we're finding in our country, but also in other places around the world and repeatedly through history, this kind of co-opting of power and authority or state by taking over religion, saying you're going to see it this way. We're going to do we're going to do government this way with this God, and you're going to have to fall in line. And so it switches it around from being a kind of faith that's related to Jesus to something that's centered around domination and power.
Mm. All right. And so what did then the desert elders do? What was their reaction?
They just got the heck out of there.
Right.
Now, some of them actually sort of reformed and did things like simplifying their way of life. We see this in ascetic practices within Rome itself. And these house churches that were there, some of them began their own little communities where they'd give up their wealth, they'd free their slaves. Some of them had hundreds and hundreds of slaves. And they would just start doing things in a simple, devoted way without looking to the powers that be for luxury and privilege and all these kind of cushy situations that start to arrive on the scene. If you're wealthy in this period of time as things are changing, you don't want your son to go into the military. You want him to go into the priesthood, and you kind of buy your way in and you wind up influencing it. And then it really starts to switch the kind of leadership you see in the highest places in the church. So, and also Constantine and tried to get all the Christians on the same page. So let's do the creeds. Let's decide what we actually believe. Then anybody who doesn't believe outside of this thing, they're out, or we might wind up killing them. And so, yeah, what the desert elders did, but also a lot of people in that period that were devoted, that really cared about the way of Jesus, they decided, well, let's do what Jesus did and John the Baptist and some of the prophets, and let's give everything up. Let's renounce that. And this is the first instance of monasteries and monastic practice. It's what's considered a proto-monastic period that wound up influencing the medieval period in an extreme way. When Rome breaks down, the only real stable centers a lot of times were monasteries. And this is where we have the beginnings of universities too.
Okay. All right. So they kind of left the society behind in a way, or at least retreated from it. I mean, there's still a sense of society and that they are a community. We're out in this space. What were they doing out there in the desert?
They were being mentored by the mothers and fathers, by the spiritual mothers and fathers who would walk with them, give them lessons. They would learn how to be in community together. After decades and decades of living in community, they'd sort of be given permission to go out and be hermits in these sort of utterly desolate places, in these little huts. But then they would have they needed to be supported by the community. These people would come back on Sundays and Saturdays. They would fellowship together and do the liturgy, the divine liturgy, and break bread together. And so even though they were set apart in many ways in silence and prayer and fasting a lot of times, then they would come back and be in community again. So they started this whole new way of life of being together. And of course, we all know that when you're even in a family situation, living together is not always easy. They had a rule of life that would help them know when are our hours of the day that we work or pray, or how do we solve disputes. And they were also in strict obedience to the father or the mother of that community. In the female communities, there was an amma or a mother, and in the male communities, there was a father. And you gave up everything. You gave up whatever wealth you had for the good of everyone, and you walked in the ways of Jesus.
So some people came from modest backgrounds, but other people were really they were a part of the system and rejected it. Can you tell us about some of those folks?
Yeah, well, a lot of particularly the women, we find out who gave up their wealth, tremendous wealth, some aristocracy sometimes of Rome and other countries as well. They would give it all up, but also to build communities and to help the sick, help the poor. And also visitors were always welcome. And so there was enough money to buy food or necessities for visitors that came by. It was very important hospitality that you were entertaining, not entertaining in that type of way, but caring for people that would come in as if it was Jesus himself. And so both men and women, plenty of them gave up everything and came there and gave it up for the group. They went poor doing it and accepting this new way of life. And also it was celibacy as well. And so this was giving up your chance at a legacy of, you'd have a spiritual legacy perhaps, but you wouldn't have necessarily have children, or some came after they had children, and
Mm,
some, of course, never married.
yeah. What inspired you to write about this at this time? Are you looking
Yeah.
to kind of kickstart a new desert ascetic
A little bit.
movement? Okay.
Like, when I think about it, I don't wanna have that life.
Hmm.
I would be one of those people that, and hundreds of thousands of people did this. They would go to the desert and visit, or they'd stay for a few weeks or a few months.
Okay.
I don't know if I could handle that, so I'm not saying, "Hey, everybody,
Yeah.
let's do the desert. That sounds fun."
Right.
But I do want us to be inspired by their wisdom and their stories. And because I didn't ever really know about this group of people, and their stories were forgotten, their wisdom was unknown to me, that inspired me as I started learning about all these different people. You know, there was the crime boss that came out to the desert and changed his way of life. There was the woman who paid her way to the Holy Land through sexual favors, you know, and she's trying to seduce pilgrims along the way, not a Jesus follower, just kind of
Mm,
taking
mhm.
advantage of people. She changes her whole life. And just these kind of stunning and inspiring stories drew me in. And I thought, I want to share this. I feel like their stories have been forgotten.
Mm. So was Evagrius kind of your entry point? Was that your aha moment of like, oh, I just really want to know more about this?
Well, Evagrius was such a fascinating character because he's kind of doing genius level psychology work, you know, eons before psychology was a
Mm,
field. But
yeah.
he really, by his own empathy and his own experiences, and then really being a good noticer and helping people along the way. He's a very, very educated man, and he has a lot of students. And he notices, oh, there's these 8 or 9 things that everybody falls into. It's just because we're human beings. It's not to put anybody into a shame spiral, but it's to
Mm,
kind of do this preventative spiritual medicine. I was super inspired by him from my first book. And then I found out his backstory, and he is changes his whole life because of a spiritual mother. And I thought, I didn't know that. There's so
mm,
much more to his story, and there are so many people that he influenced. And it totally was like a gateway guy into the whole era.
mm. So is there one now as you look through, I guess, the catalog of different desert elders who you've discovered that
Mhm.
you feel a kinship with or
Mhm.
admire?
Oh, yeah, and it's hard to pick. It's like, you
Sure.
can't ask someone to pick their favorite kid or something that maybe shouldn't happen.
Okay. Yeah.
But I have a deep respect and admiration for Amma Syncletica, Amma Theodora, Amma Matrona, the women who have been left out often. But also, Abba Moses is probably my sentimental favorite because he
That's
goes
the
through
crime
this.
boss guy. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, he was a very violent, angry person,
Mm,
and he had some real trauma that would be you would understand why that would happen. But he really doubled down. He was a bad, bad, bad dude. But I think because he fought against all of the vices, all the 9 vices, and had to work for decades and decades, and went into service to the brothers, he would wind up staying up all night and walking out to the cistern to get water and refill the jars of his brothers who were sleeping, in order to humble himself and really take on the character of Christ and become
mm.
this completely transformed pacifist in the end.
Yeah. And it's a funny paradox to think about because as you paint the picture, you compare him to
Mm.
somebody who might be built like a professional wrestler. And here's this person who's
Huge.
waking up before everybody else to go haul the water out.
Right, right. He is such a big dude that there's a story about him that some people tried to rob, some men tried to come and ransack the monastery where he was, and he captures
Mm.
them, throws 4 of them over his back, and carries them to his spiritual father and says, what do I do with these guys? And meanwhile, he's subdued, tied up and subdued for men. And his spiritual father says, well, let him go. And he goes, okay. And his obedience and his kindness to them, they're completely blown away. And they realize, we know who you are. You were our boss, back in the day. And why haven't you
Mm,
decided to just rip us limb for limb? They're so stunned by this reversal that they also become part of the community too.
mm. Well, how did you go about the research of this book? I had mentioned before that
Mhm.
it's really tough to find information on these
Mhm.
people because I don't think they were recording a whole lot, were they?
In terms of, like, their histories and things like that?
I mean, they themselves weren't writing tomes to pass
Right,
down. Yeah.
right. Yeah, what we have are a lot of sayings that were just passed down orally for a while.
Mm,
The thing I really, was impressed by was that my Protestant tradition doesn't really value them or revere them. But the Coptic Christians, the Egyptian
mm,
Christians, the Orthodox Christians, the Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox, these are their heroes. They have feast days for them and they celebrate them and they know about them. Their liturgy in church refers to them, and some of their prayers that were written are prayed throughout the services and things like that. So,
mm,
really, on other parts of the world, they're their ancestors that they actually claim, and so that's where I found the most material, you could say, that
yeah,
is sort of just looking in that direction
mm,
instead of um, my own tradition, basically. And I was really, really helped by Phoebe Frog McKeel, who's a Coptic Christian. She lives in New Jersey, but she's
yeah,
Egyptian. And she really was able to kind of add, when she read an early version, add the tweaks that were needed to understand things in a culturally appropriate way. Like she mentioned to me, this is something I would have not realized. I think of, well, there's us Western Christians and Protestantism and Catholicism. Then there's these Eastern Christians, but she would say there are Eastern Orthodox Christians, but there are Oriental Orthodox Christians. And
mhm,
Oriental Orthodox Christians tend to be people who are not white. But Eastern Orthodox Christians tend to be people who are white. Well, I would have never known this. This is a really great insight, and just kind of embracing that side of our Christian tradition that goes all the way far back. Her tradition goes back to Mark founding their church in Egypt in
mm,
like 45, pretty early on.
yeah,
And so that's really what I was looking to draw from, and that it opened my eyes to this kind of neglected historical era in Christianity. We tend to focus in Protestantism anyway. We tend to focus on like the last 500 years of Christianity.
yeah. Mm. Yeah, and we tend to think that the way that we're doing it here in the US is the way
Mhm.
that's kind of been handed down over the centuries, right? And
Right.
then
Right.
we it's sometimes a wake-up call to realize, well, there are these other limbs of the family tree.
Mhm.
Were you aware of those other limbs before this process, or was this process in researching about the desert elders a way of becoming aware of some of those other
Yeah.
limbs?
Very much both of those answers. I was aware
Okay.
of Eastern Christianity to a degree. I really enjoy reading the church fathers, like in my own research, reading
Mm,
the early church fathers. And then a whole world did open up to me, especially when I have a friendship with someone who's Coptic Christian.
mm,
And that really makes a huge difference, who is influencing you and who's saying, "Hey, well, read this book and read this book." Books that would never kind of come in my algorithm, you could say.
right.
And then they kind of it really opens your eyes. And these are our brothers and sisters in Christ. This is not
Mm,
some errant group that they're just very early on. And we are a split of a split of a split of a split down the tree of Christianity. But we have a lot to learn.
mm. Um, so are there certain practices that you discovered the desert elders utilizing that you
Mhm.
see being practiced today, or maybe you've even brought into your own life?
Yeah, and I really love that question because it's kind of like we can talk about these ancient people and it can be like these fun stories, but like what impact does it have in real day-to-day life for us? And
Right.
I
Yeah.
really do hope.
I think we can both admit that we're not gonna pack things up and go to the desert, but
Right,
that doesn't
right.
mean that we don't have
So
anything to learn
so
here,
what should
right?
we
So
do? Right.
yeah.
And I think it's important to mention two things is that there are people still practicing this in this exact locations that I
Really?
reference in the book.
Hmm.
You can go to Abba Moses monastery, and there are people there who are monks. It
Hmm.
was broken up in history. Sometimes these communities were raided, everybody was run off, and
Yeah.
then they'd come back. Eventually, they'd rebuild, and this has happened over and over and over, especially with Islamic. the Islamic religion moving through and kind of taking over, but then they would sort of push back, and there's been this thing going on for a really long time. So, and then there's monastics all over the world today living in these very simple practices with these stillness, silence, and solitude being these pillars of their spiritual life. And I, for myself, and I hope that other people, I sense that people are thinking, maybe we should unplug a little more. Maybe we should simplify. Maybe we should divest of power in these sort of worldly ways. And I think it draws us into certain practices, perhaps fasting, perhaps renunciation, cultivating inner stillness and silence and solitude in our own ways that kind of are inspired by the desert, and kind of taking our cues from them and reading their wisdom. How do we do it? And they have specific information for us about it. I think those are all things I'm trying to do personally, because I do, just like a lot of people, I do the doom scrolling when I'm in a bad way. I don't want to be malformed spiritually by all these cultural influences that wind up affecting me. And I really look to the desert, that spirituality and the wisdom of the mothers and fathers to kind of inform how I want to live my life and my own rule of life that I've crafted, and then wind up updating every 6 months or a year.
I think part of their practice was the pilgrimage of going out into this space. And I think there's a novel way that you've kind of come about to invite us into that practice of pilgrimage as well, with the video game that is, I guess, a side part of all of this.
Yeah, right.
Like, we're invited into the story of that. Can you tell us about the video game, how it came about?
Yeah, this is funny. Nobody ever asks about this, and no one really. Have you tried it at all? Did you give it a try?
Yeah. So for me, it was very reminiscent of, if people are into video games, like the Knights of the Old Republic Star Wars games, like this kind of RPG, turn-based.
Oh gosh, right.
Yeah.
Now, how this happened was, I turned in the manuscript, but I wanted people to kind of be invited to come into a whole nother world. And, the graphics aren't like, it was a shoestring, couple $100 thing I did.
Wow.
And I really do, if people wanted me to develop it more, I'd have to do like a fundraising round or something like that. But the whole idea was like, what would it be like to kind of take a walk and look for them? Like, you're supposed to look for Evagrius, and then you wind up finding Athanasius and Alexandria, and and it's very slow. It's supposed to kind of slow you down, slow your roll, and then just get interested in the time period and the aesthetic of the desert, and looking for Evagrius and finding his wisdom. And it would be super fun. I kind of just dug into this as a way to bide my time before I had edits to do and stuff. So I thought, well, this could be fun. But honestly, I don't hear too many people that too many people have tried it. And then you can extend your play by putting in your email address, and it's not supposed to be spammy or anything like that. But I hope that people.
Yeah, it's a little long to do in one sitting, but
it's a little, So it's really kind of, it slows you down. So if people go to desert.lisadelay.com, you can try it and see if you like it, and let me know. And there's another thing I hope that people do, which is like match yourself to an elder, almost like those old time Cosmo or BuzzFeed matches. Like, which Disney princess are you? It would be like, which elder would you be well matched with? And so there's questions. There's like 6 or 7 questions, and sort of about your personal needs and your spiritual goals and things like that, and personality. And then, if as you answer that, you get paired with somebody, and then I can send you additional information if you're interested in going beyond that. And I have also a devotional that includes some of their wisdom and some things to reflect on too. So I'm kind of trying to draw people into even being mentored by someone who's a forebearer, and getting people into this idea of having a spiritual mother or father, someone you can trust and that will companion with you. And sometimes, even though these people aren't alive, they can still sort of companion us. But I also am a firm believer in getting a spiritual director or a trusted spiritual friend who's trained, who can just walk with you, because I think a lot of church is very programmatic and event based.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily life to life based. You know, we
Mm.
kind of come together for events and then we kind of go back to our lives and
Yeah.
that
See
sort
you
of thing.
Sunday morning. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, hi, nice to meet you. Have a
Yeah.
good day. But then it's sort of a little disappear from each other's lives sometimes. And so what's nice about these ideas of companionship, spiritual companionship, is that you know someone always has your back and you can go to them, you know, maybe once or a month or twice a month. And I want the desert elders to kind of play a part in that too.
Hmm. Did you go through your own exercise? Did you get paired up with somebody? Was it surprising to you?
I pretty much am a Moses
Okay.
disciple. Yeah,
All right.
I'm just like totally a fangirl of Moses. So yeah, I can't shake him. He's just so beautiful. He's such a beautiful soul, and he's so like he doesn't let stuff bother him, and
Mm.
he doesn't get rattled, and he's so humble. So people would there's another story, I'm not sure if this made it in, but there were dignitaries that went to see him because his reputation is just, you know, going far and wide. People would come see him and just go back to where they're from and just talk about him. So dignitaries come
Mm.
to see him and they are not sure it's him. And they say, you know, can you help us find Moses? And he goes, oh, that fool, you're not going to find him around here. So they're like, okay. And they go back and they said, we couldn't find him. And it's like, that was him.
Uh,
He's not, he doesn't want to really advise you. Like
mm.
he's pretty chill. He's very humble. He's not going to think he has a lot to tell you. He's not going to be a sage on the stage. You know, he's
Mm.
really, he's really different and very, very humble. So it's just him kind of dodging these dignitaries, being like, nah, that's all right. Not interested.
Well, you mentioned being turned on to some new books. Are there any that stick out to you for somebody that wanted to do further reading?
Well, in my opinion, the stuff I list in the back of the book is worth the price of the book, especially
Okay.
if you care at all about
Yeah.
like digging in deeper, because what the references that I have in here that I read from and also that are just important works. So um, there's things like important works in the back of the book by Mary C. Earle is
Mm.
Desert Mothers, Spiritual Practices from the Women of the Wilderness. There's Henry Carrigan, who wrote The Wisdom of the Desert, Fathers and Mothers. And there's just a whole bunch of listings back here that if you're my book could, I hope, be the kind of the gateway into that world as well. But also what's nice, I list them in there too, is that reading the original works, like some of Evagrius's work on prayer, and just reading what he had to say and what he would teach, that's pretty cool, pretty amazing stuff. And so I hope people get further interested in the era. I have noticed a few other books popping up about them, and I
Okay.
hope it's a little bit of a movement toward being interested in them again.
Very good. Well, and for folks who want to know a little bit more about you and your work, you've mentioned the website once, but is there kind of a catch-all website to reach out to you?
Yeah, so the desert website is desert.lisadelay.com.
Okay.
Lisadelay.com is my main website, and I've done the Spark My Muse podcast since 2015. You can also find me on Substack, and I'm on Instagram a little bit. Just your basic Google of Lisa Colón DeLay will get you to plenty of things. Oh, and the other thing I've been doing recently, like the last
Yeah.
year, is coming up with videos on YouTube and really getting into some of the work of David Bentley Hart, who's just a fascinating philosophy of mind and theologian kind of guy. So there's little things that I've been doing sort of teaching wise on the YouTubes.
Okay. Philosophy of mind. Tell me about that
Philosophy
a
of
little
mind.
bit.
Yeah, it's ontology. It's kind of like the study of being in a way, and God, high theism. So the God beyond gods. So the real, the really real, and consciousness and reality. Those are kind of things that all sort of trip my trigger, and I really get interested in. You know, for me too, I think being a pastor's kid, I've kind of been deconstructing here and there since like 7 years old.
Yeah.
You know, wondering like what is construct that we're bringing to
Mm.
this to the truth or to the words of Jesus, and what is the essence, what is the really real. And so all those things kind of get me excited about delving into things like consciousness and not so much non-dualism but monism. So it's just this idea that there isn't any duality of material and spiritual. There's no such, that's just a false dichotomy. And I kind of appreciated when those barriers have been broken down by somebody as intelligent as David Bentley Hart. I wind up trying to just distill his stuff that's such a tough slog to get through and just distill it into, okay, here's the bullet points of what this actually means. But it's been really interesting. And also he talks about universal reconciliation and this idea of going against this later idea of eternal conscious torment, which is an add-on later in Christianity. So all that's been really interesting to me. Not sure I'll write a book about it, but it's been stuff I've been kind of toying with and digging into a little deeper.
Yeah, and that you can explore on YouTube. So
right.
Cool. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing these stories with us and for giving us this book and this wisdom from the past. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your interest.
What are you taking away from this conversation? Are you ready to create a little more space in your life? If you want to check out the game that we talked about or other resources about the Desert Elders, then visit our show notes at umc.org/compass. Thanks for taking this journey with us. We also want to extend a special thank you to the team at United Methodist Communications who make this whole podcast possible. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review Compass on your favorite podcast platform. Helps others find us and join the conversation too. Thanks again for listening. Look forward to journeying with you again next time in a couple weeks. Peace.